You wake up on a straw-stuffed mattress that smells like wet dog and regret. It's the year 1239. Summer. Somewhere in what will one day be called France, although currently it's mostly just fields, fleas, and feudalism. The rooster didn't crow this morning, which is odd, because he usually crows right into your soul like clockwork. But instead, everything feels wrong. The air is still. The chickens are silent. Your neighbor hasn't yelled at his pigs. And the sky, well, the sky has been getting darker, even though the sun's supposed to be rising. You rub your eyes, which sting with smoke from the hearth fire you forgot to put out last night. Again. The warmth is gone, the ashes are cold, and your mouth tastes like whatever passed for beer at last night's feast. Spoiler, it was water that argued with a wheat field and lost. You stumble to your feet and step over the family dog, which may or may not still be alive, and push aside the animal skin curtain that serves as your front door. Outside, everything has a weird yellowish tint, like God tried to install mood lighting and gave up halfway. And then you look up. What you see in the sky is not okay. Not even a little. It's not clouds. It's not smoke. The sun is there, but it's being eaten. By something. A great black disk, slowly devouring the light like a demonic pastry. You freeze. Your heart starts doing that thing where it forgets how many beats it's supposed to do per minute. Your feet are planted like you just got cursed by a hedge witch. You try to remember if you sinned recently, which, let's be honest, you absolutely did. Now before you get too comfortable here in your pre-astronomy panic attack, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy long, oddly soothing dives into human panic and poor hygiene. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing people drop in from everywhere, whether it's 2 a.m. in New Jersey or nap time in New Zealand. So yes, you're witnessing a solar eclipse. But you don't know that. No one around you knows that. The word eclipse doesn't even mean a thing that happens because the moon blocks the sun yet. To you, it means a sign from God or possibly a sky demon with dietary preferences. You know what an omen looks like, and this is it. This is end-of-days energy. The kind of thing that makes peasants soil themselves and lords donate their castles to the church, just in case. Back inside, your mother is praying, loudly, to several saints at once. Your father is sharpening an axe, which is worrying because the only thing to cut is darkness and possibly the neighbor's goat. You hear someone ringing a bell in the village square. Not the normal someone's getting married bell. This is the sprint toward the nearest holy relic and cry bell. The villagers are already gagging, staring up with mouths agape and theology spinning out of control. There's a monk shouting something about fire raining from heaven. He's barefoot, wild-eyed, and hasn't blinked in about 8 minutes. He's quoting Revelation, probably misquoted, but no one's checking the Latin. Some people are already confessing their sins in real time. Others are just screaming. One guy is trying to build a small boat. You don't ask questions. This isn't just your village, by the way. Across medieval Europe and beyond, people reacted to eclipses with the kind of rational calm you might expect from someone who still thought epilepsy was caused by demons and childbirth was best handled by prayer and a stick to bite down on. In other words, they absolutely lost their minds. There are records, beautiful, frantic, ink-blotted records, of eclipses being described as dragons eating the sun, divine punishment, or battles between celestial bodies. And honestly, when the sky starts playing horror movies without warning, you'd reach for metaphors too. Science, you see, has not yet put in the legwork. The word heliocentric won't show up for a few hundred more years. Astronomy is still mostly astrology wearing a wig. But let's be clear, these aren't stupid people. They just have terrible data. They've got no NASA, no telescopes, no Google, no one yelling totality while filming themselves for TikTok. What they do have is fear, religion, and a deep, bone-marinated superstition that the heavens are a message board from God himself. If you're a medieval peasant, your life is already a horror story. You eat gruel. You walk everywhere. Your shoes are basically hard fabric regrets tied to your feet. You pay taxes to your local lord, your regional bishop, the king, and probably to a mysterious guy named Bertrand who just insists he gets a cut. You sleep on hay next to pigs, and if you live past 40, people suspect witchcraft. So when the one reliable thing in your sky, the sun, starts vanishing in broad daylight, that's it. That's apocalypse fuel. You don't just panic. You perform rituals. You clang pots. You burn herbs. You chant. You throw salt. You dig up your dead cousin to see if he's glowing. People reported everything from ghost armies in the sky to blood rain to animals speaking Latin. One monk claimed the birds flew backward. He may have just been dehydrated, but the account made it into a manuscript anyway. Meanwhile, in more advanced regions, where scholars wore hats and argued in Latin, there were actual attempts to explain the phenomenon. But since math was still considered suspicious by most of the population, these explanations tended to be politely ignored. A few brave astrologers, yes, astrologers, not astronomers, could occasionally predict an eclipse, but this just made people suspect sorcery. Imagine someone today predicting an earthquake and getting arrested for witchcraft. That's the vibe. In China, by the way, they were way ahead on eclipses. Like, embarrassingly ahead. By 1000 BCE, the Chinese had already figured out that eclipses happened when the moon passed between the earth and the sun. But because it's medieval Europe, where most intellectual progress has been buried under piles of feudal nonsense and plague corpses, that knowledge hasn't really made it west yet. Instead, you get poems about the sky weeping, paintings of angels holding up curtains over the sun, and widespread panic-induced conversions to monastic life. There are even chronicles of entire villages whipping themselves in public, yes, like actual flagellation, because they assumed the eclipse was divine punishment for something, anything. It didn't really matter what. If you were a king or noble, things got political. Eclipses were often taken as omens for war, betrayal, or the death of a ruler. Imagine every government press conference beginning with, well, the sun turned black at noon, so we're invading Normandy. Historians have found letters where rulers delayed battles, changed successions, or called emergency fasts just because the sky got moody. One glorious example comes from 1133, when a solar eclipse occurred just after King Henry I of England left for Normandy. The chroniclers lost their collective minds. One wrote, "The day darkened over, and the sun became as if it were a 3-day-old moon, and the stars showed themselves." The people said it was a sign the king would die soon. Spoiler alert, he did. 2 years later. From eating too many eels. The eclipse, apparently, was his celestial Yelp review. But back to you, standing there in your itchy wool tunic, staring at the sky like it owes you money. Eventually, the sun begins to return. Slowly. Like a curtain being drawn back by a celestial toddler with commitment issues. The light comes back in patches, and with it, the sound. Birds chirp again. The air warms. People stop screaming. Mostly. Some claim they saw angels. Others insist they saw demons. A few opportunists claim their relics glowed during the darkness and start charging admission. Medieval capitalism is alive and well. Your priest calls for a sermon, which is more or less him yelling at everyone to be better, sin less, and maybe donate more eggs. You nod solemnly, still shaken. The day resumes, sort of. You go back to whatever you were doing, probably digging something or turning vegetables into disappointment. But something in you has shifted. You've seen the sky betray you. You felt what it's like when nature pulls the rug out from reality. And no one can quite explain it. Not really. The monk said it was divine. The merchant said it was bad luck. The drunk said it was the moon's fault, which is weirdly close to correct. But you just want to sleep and hope it doesn't happen again. Centuries from now, people will gather in wide-open fields with fancy glasses and Instagram captions, timing the perfect moment when the moon slides in front of the sun like a dramatic X. They'll understand it. They'll expect it. Some will even celebrate it. But for you, right now, it's just a reminder that the universe is vast, uncaring, and occasionally shows up to ruin lunch. You lie down that night, still half wondering if the darkness will return. You mumble a prayer. You wrap your cloak tighter. The stars above twinkle with their usual indifference. And for the first time in days, you fall asleep not knowing if tomorrow will come. But it does. And so does the next eclipse. And the next. And with each one, humanity inches closer to understanding. Slowly, painfully, through manuscripts, mathematics, and many, many more panic peasants. It's been a few years since the sky tried to swallow the sun in front of you like a cosmic prank gone too far. You're older now. A few more wrinkles, a lot more back pain. You've got a kid, or two, or 7, no one's quite sure, least of all you. You still live in the same wooden hut with more draft than insulation. Your mattress still smells like betrayal. And the chickens still have more personality than your in-laws. And one morning, once again, something feels off. You're hauling water from the stream when you notice it, that eerie stillness. The kind of silence that makes your skin itch. Not peaceful silence, like birdsong at dawn. No. This is the kind of silence that medieval people associate with uh-oh. The birds have disappeared. The wind has stopped moving. The trees look like they're holding their breath. And the sunlight? It's acting shady. Literally. You squint up at the sky, because no one's told you not to do that yet. And there it is. Again. That cursed, creeping shadow, slicing across the sun like a black coin sliding over gold. It's happening again. But this time you're ready. Sort of. You drop the bucket. Water splashes onto your ankles. You sprint back to the village, shouting something halfway between help and the devils in the sky, which, in medieval Europe, are practically interchangeable. You burst into the town square where a small crowd has already formed, looking up in confused horror, like pigeons trying to understand algebra. This time, though, you notice something different. Among the flailing peasants and screaming livestock, there's a man with a scroll. He's wearing a weird hat. Always a red flag. He's scribbling something while glancing at the sky through what appears to be a slice of tinted horn. Someone calls him Master Fulbert. Apparently, he's a natural philosopher, which, in modern terms, means a guy who makes educated guesses and hopes he doesn't get excommunicated for it. Master Fulbert mutters that the moon is passing between the earth and the sun, and that this is a natural, predictable event. He says it like he expects people to be impressed. They are not. One man throws a turnip at him. Another tries to bless him with garlic. Still, Fulbert keeps talking. Loudly. For attention. He unrolls his scroll and points to a chart. It's covered in lines, numbers, and stars. You can't read any of it because you're a medieval peasant, but he insists that the eclipse was foretold. That this celestial event is part of the harmony of the spheres. You nod politely and then grab your child before she starts licking the dirt again. It's not that people don't want to believe him. It's just that logic is hard when the sun is vanishing. Let's step back for a second. Throughout the Middle Ages, attempts to understand eclipses scientifically were scattered like breadcrumbs through a forest of superstition. You had people like Fulbert, educated in monastic schools, whispering about lunar orbits and shadow cones. And then you had the rest of Europe banging pots together to scare off sky monsters. The cognitive dissonance was real. Imagine trying to explain orbital mechanics to a Mun who thinks thunder is God bowling with the bones of sinners. That was medieval science. An uphill battle, conducted while people literally believed the earth was flat. Spoiler, educated people didn't actually believe that. But it made a great punchline later. Anyway, back to you. Despite Fulbert's confident sermon about lunar positioning, the villagers have other priorities. One guy is convinced this is a warning from St. Cuthbert. Another says it's punishment for the bishop's recent raise in tithes. A third suggests burning a goat just in case. They do. It doesn't help. A noblewoman rides into town on a horse that's clearly been given more grooming than any human in this village has ever received. She demands to know why the sun is dark. Fulbert starts explaining again, this time with more dramatic hand gestures. She listens for 5 seconds, declares it heresy, and throws a bag of coins at the church to fix it. The local priest rings the bell again. Not the wedding bell. Not the death bell. The everyone scream and pray bell. It's getting a lot of use lately. As darkness spreads across the land, the panic reaches a crescendo. Somewhere, a baby is crying. Someone else is yelling that their ale turned sour. Your neighbor insists his sheep just gave birth to a 2-headed lamb. You're pretty sure it was just a normal goat with a helmet on, but now is not the time for nuance. Back in the church, the priest is holding an impromptu mass. He's quoting scripture at top speed, trying to cover all the bases. Psalms, Genesis, Revelations. He throws in a little Song of Solomon, just in case. People are weeping, kneeling, swaying. A child asks if the sun is dead. Someone faints. But then, slowly, the light returns. And once again, everyone pretends they never panicked. Except for the one guy who wet himself. He owns it now. Says it was holy urine. The rest of the village mutters, thanks to their chosen saints, and shuffles back to their daily grind. You sigh, pat your daughter on the head, and resume hauling water. And Fulbert? He vanishes. Maybe he was chased out. Maybe he went to another village to be ignored there. Maybe he just got tired of explaining the moon to people who thought bread mold was witchcraft. You never find out. The weird part is, even after it's over, the eclipse lingers. Not in the sky, in people's heads. 4 weeks, people talk about it. Was it a sign? A punishment? A warning? Some say it foretells famine. Others, war. The baker claims his oven has been acting strange ever since. The priest insists it's proof that judgment is near, and you should probably double your donations. And here's the thing. Sometimes, bad stuff does happen after an eclipse. Not because the sky is trying to make a point, but because life in the medieval world is basically a highlight reel of disaster. Eclipses just get good timing. Famine? Check. Plague? Sure. Uprising? Naturally. All of this fuels the legend. Eclipses become a cosmic trailer for the next catastrophe. Every time one happens, it gets tied to whatever horrible thing happens next. And so the cycle continues. The sky goes dark. The people freak out. The scholars mumble about shadows. The priests yell about sin. The peasants throw salt. And the world keeps turning. Let's take a little detour. Imagine you're a monk in a scriptorium. Your job is to copy manuscripts all day, every day. You sit hunched over a wooden desk by candlelight, surrounded by the smell of ink, wax, and unwashed robes. Your fingers are stained. Your spine is permanently hunched. Your only joy is the occasional illuminated doodle of a bored rabbit jousting a snail in the margins. You come across a passage describing an eclipse. Do you copy it? Of course. Do you understand it? Not really. But it sounds ominous, so you write it anyway. Then, because you're a monk and not a climatologist, you add a little commentary. Something about how it coincided with a terrible harvest. Or how a king died shortly afterward. Or how a peasant claimed to hear a trumpet in the sky. That's how eclipse legends grow, one manuscript, one monk, one melodramatic footnote at a time. Now fast forward a few decades. A new generation of peasants is born. You're still alive, somehow. Congratulations. You've made it through 3 harvests, 2 minor plagues, and a sheep-related accident that no one talks about. Your knees ache like they owe rent. And once again, the sun starts to dim. You don't even flinch this time. You sit on your rickety stool, nod to the sky, and mutter, "Oh, it's you again." Because at this point, eclipses are part of your life. Like taxes. Or rats. Or the slow, crushing weight of existential dread. You still don't understand them. But you've seen them enough to know the world won't end just because the sun took a coffee break. That doesn't stop everyone else from freaking out, of course. In nearby regions, the reactions vary. In England, someone's drawing a map of the eclipse path on parchment, using tools that are just sharp sticks and desperate optimism. In the Byzantine Empire, court astrologers are arguing whether the eclipse means the emperor will fall in love or be assassinated. Possibly both. In the Islamic world, scholars in Cordoba are writing actual mathematical predictions for future eclipses, using Arabic numerals and star charts that would blow Fulbut's dusty mind. Back in your village, a new priest has arrived. He's young, idealistic, thinks he can reform things. He tries to explain that eclipses are part of God's plan, not a punishment. People nod politely, then immediately go back to smearing ash on their foreheads and whispering to cows. There's a superstition going around that if you look at the eclipse directly, your soul will leak out through your eyes. People are wearing veils. One guy put a fish bladder over his face. Another is just hiding under a cart. You, though? You sit calmly, watch the shadow pass, and quietly sip your lukewarm ale. You've learned something valuable. The sky has moods. It doesn't always make sense. But panicking every time it throws a tantrum doesn't help. And so the light returns. The birds chirp again. The sheep resume being disappointingly normal. The priest starts collecting extra tithe, just in case. And life, as always, trudges forward. Eclipses will come and go. But the medieval mind? That stays gloriously paranoid. And as night falls once more, you lie on your lumpy bed, listening to the creak of the roof beams and the soft snore of your spouse, who smells vaguely of onions and guilt. Outside, the stars are bright. The moon is full. No strange shadows. No apocalyptic bells. Just the usual worry that tomorrow's bread will taste like dirt again. You drift off to sleep, wondering if maybe, just maybe, the next eclipse won't cause a public screaming match. Probably not. But hope is free. You wake up to the sound of bells. Not the regular ones. Not the get to church or burn forever bells, either. These are different. Frenzied. Like someone gave a drunk goat permission to conduct a choir of iron. You sit up in your itchy straw bed, ducking to avoid the ceiling beam you always forget exists. Your joints crack like old bread crust. You look around. Everyone else is already gone. The sun hasn't risen. At least, not properly. There's a strange glow outside, like the sky forgot how to morning. You pull on your one good tunic, the one that's only patched in 5 places, and head outside. And there it is again. The eclipse. At this point, you're no longer surprised. You've seen a few of these. They're like bad house guests, show up uninvited, overstay their welcome, and make everyone question their life choices. But this time feels different. People aren't just panicking. They're preparing. You see a man hammering a wooden cross into the ground. Another is digging a pit. Your neighbor, who once tried to marry a goose, is whispering Latin phrases into a jar of milk. A group of nuns are singing a hymn that sounds suspiciously like a funeral dirge. You walk toward the church, because let's be honest, where else would you go? It's the only building in town made of stone and shame. Inside, the priest is pacing. He's sweating. Not the holy kind of sweat. The nervous kind. The kind that happens when you realize you spent all your sermon time preaching about fish, and now the sky looks like it's about to eat the sun. You sit in the back pew, which smells like mildew and spilled guilt. The priest clears his throat and launches into a sermon. It's mostly yelling. Something about repentance. Something else about fire. And, of course, a healthy dose of "this is all your fault." You've heard it before. But this time, there's a twist. He says this particular eclipse was predicted by a scholar from the East. He says this man wrote letters, calculations, warnings. You don't know what any of that means, but it sounds impressive. Also terrifying. Because if someone knew this was coming, it must be serious. Let's pause for a moment, because now we need to talk about medieval astrology. Not astronomy. No telescopes here. No understanding of orbits or gravitational pull. Medieval astrology was the belief that the positions of the stars, planets, and eclipses directly affected everything from crop yields to who gets boils on their neck. Astrologers were taken seriously. Like, get hired by kings seriously. Their predictions could shape policy, or start wars, or get people killed, which is a lot of pressure for someone whose main tools are candlelight, goat vellum, and blind hope. So when an eclipse happened, astrologers didn't say neat. They said, oh. They'd write up long-winded interpretations filled with ominous phrases like disruption of humors, change in the fate of rulers, or Mars ascendant in the house of pestilence. All very reassuring. Back to you. The priest finishes his sermon with a dramatic wave of his arms, knocks over a candle, and nearly sets the altar on fire. Someone yells that it's a sign. Of what? No one's sure. But it feels biblical. Outside, the eclipse is reaching its peak. The sun has become a sickly ring. Shadows stretch in all the wrong directions. Birds are flying in circles like they forgot how wings work. You hold your breath. And then the shouting begins. A man in a cloak runs into the village, square screaming that the Antichrist has been born. He's holding a book. It's written in Latin. No one can read it, but they assume he's telling the truth because he looks exhausted and vaguely damp. He points toward a forest. Says he saw a light. And a baby. And a wolf with 2 heads. This is clearly very serious. The villagers react the only way they know how, by grabbing pitchforks and sprinting toward danger. You, being wiser than most and slightly hungover, choose to hang back. And you're rewarded. Because the baby? Not the Antichrist. Just a baby. The wolf? A sick dog with mange and a dead squirrel stuck to its head. The light? A reflection off a puddle. Everything else? Hysteria, sprinkled with malnutrition and fermented barley. By the time the eclipse passes and the light returns, half the village is in tears, the priest is curled up in a barrel, and someone's managed to set fire to the bread oven. Again. And you? You're just trying to find where your shoe went. Let's take another detour. Further east, things are a little more sophisticated. In the Islamic world, particularly in places like Baghdad and Cordoba, scholars are calculating eclipses centuries in advance. They've got astrolabes, paper, libraries, things that smell like knowledge instead of mold. They're observing the heavens, documenting celestial patterns, and somehow managing to do all of this without screaming every time the moon passes in front of the sun. One famous scholar, al-Battani, wrote eclipse tables that could predict solar and lunar eclipses with impressive accuracy. Imagine living in a world where someone could look at the sky and say, "Yep, that'll disappear on Tuesday." Mind-blowing. Meanwhile, in your corner of Europe, someone's throwing a sausage into a well to appease the dark. You sigh. Again. But back to astrology, because it's everywhere now. Kings are consulting astrologers before going to war. Queens are asking them if they'll bear sons. Merchants won't cross rivers if the stars say no. It's like a medieval version of checking your horoscope, except with more real-world consequences and significantly fewer Instagram graphics. You overhear a traveling monk say that an eclipse in 1133 marked the death of King Henry I of England. He says the skies turned dark just before the king's final journey. It's all very poetic, very ominous, also very unprovable. But again, the vibe was strong. This kind of celestial association becomes the norm. If there's an eclipse and then something bad happens, that's confirmation. If there's an eclipse and nothing happens, you just didn't wait long enough. It's coming. Just be patient and paranoid. So now, even the absence of disaster is evidence of future disaster. Very convenient. By this point in your life, you've started keeping a journal. Well, a bundle of parchment with poorly drawn birds and your own made-up spelling. You mark each eclipse you remember. You write notes like "Sky dark, dog screamed, uncle threw up." It's your own little almanac of confusion. But it brings you comfort. Because if you can track the sky's tantrums, maybe you can feel slightly less like a puppet in some divine comedy. Another eclipse. Another panic. Another round of screaming children and shouting adults. This time, someone builds a giant wooden effigy of a sun and sets it on fire to remind the real one who's boss. It doesn't work, but the marshmallows turn out great. Eventually, people begin whispering about a new idea. That maybe, just maybe, eclipses aren't evil. They're just events. Like rain, or taxes, or the sound your knees make when you stand up too fast. Some folks resist this. Superstition is comforting. It gives chaos a name. It turns the terrifying into the familiar. If you can blame a dark sky on sin or spirits, then you feel like you've got some control. Even if that control involves throwing herbs into a pit and shouting nonsense at the moon. But others start to listen. They see the patterns. The predictability. They talk to travelers. They read strange scrolls. They learn about orbits, geometry, astronomy. You watch as your grandchildren grow up in a world where some people almost understand what's going on above their heads. Almost. But every time the sky darkens, the fear creeps back. Because knowing why something happens isn't always enough to stop people from losing their minds when it does. Still, you take comfort in the fact that you've seen it all before. You survived pestilence, famine, 3 popes at the same time, and that one time a horse got elected to your village council by accident. A disappearing son? Just another Tuesday. As the years pass, you grow older, slower, wiser, but mostly just more tired. You teach your great-grandchildren what you know, which is mostly don't eat mushrooms you didn't plant and never trust a man who owns 2 ferrets and no shoes. And then, one last time, the sky grows dark. You're too old to run now. Your knees gave up somewhere between Lent and the last lunar eclipse. You sit quietly on your stool, wrapped in a cloak that used to be a curtain. You sip your tea, which tastes mostly like moss. You watch as the sun disappears behind the moon once more. You smile. Because this time, no one's screaming. Okay, a few people are. But they're new. They'll learn. The priest is calm. He's reading from a scroll. A boy is sketching the eclipse in the dirt with a stick. The baker offers you a roll, which is stale but emotionally supportive. Someone's playing a lute. And for once, the world doesn't feel like it's ending. Just pausing. The sky darkens. The wind holds its breath. And in that stillness, you remember all the eclipses before. All the fear, the confusion, the shouting, the sausage in the well. And then, as always, the light returns. Slowly, softly, the shadows retreat. The world exhales. And you, wrapped in your blanket of rags and memory, close your eyes and drift into sleep. Because eclipses are temporary. But so is everything else. You wake up to the smell of onions and disappointment. Your mouth is dry. Your back hurts. The mattress is still a sack of straw and old regrets. You stretch, scratch something that might be a bug bite or a curse mark, and stand up too fast, which was a mistake. The room spins. The cat hisses at you. You apologize. Today is market day, which, in theory, is fun. Unless you're you. In which case, market day means noise, mud, overpriced garlic, and people yelling about turnips like they're luxury items. You put on your tunic, the one that smells slightly less like mold, and shuffle outside. But there's a problem. No one's there. The market square is empty. The stalls are deserted. There's a chicken, yes. But it looks just as confused as you are. You squint at the sky. Ah, of course. There it is again. Another solar eclipse. You'd think, by now, people would get used to this. But no. Every time the sun goes on vacation behind the moon, the village reacts like God just rage quit the universe. You trudge toward the well, because why not? The bucket is missing. Again. Someone probably threw it in to ward off the darkness. You sigh. You sighed so much in your life you could probably qualify as a wind instrument. You find a small group huddled near the chapel, clutching rosaries like they're lottery tickets. An old woman is chanting something in Latin, or possibly just humming with confidence. A nearby merchant is trying to sell eclipse-proof bread. It's just regular bread, but now with divine crust. Let's pause here, because you might be wondering, why all the drama? Why does a simple natural phenomenon, something that lasts a few minutes and follows a totally understandable pattern, send entire villages into existential panic? Well, it's because you live in a time when nothing makes sense. Your crops die without explanation. Your neighbor coughs and then melts. A cow gives birth to a chicken. The river turns black for a week. The sky goes dark. A monk claims to have seen a saint in a potato. Everything is terrifying. So when the sun disappears, yeah, you freak out. Because it might be the end of the world. Or worse, the start of a sermon. Now, eclipses didn't just scare peasants. Oh no, they terrified kings, queens, nobles, people who wore pants made of velvet and used forks. Even they, in their gilded halls and fragrant bathwater, panicked when the sky changed colors. You remember hearing about the Byzantine emperor who locked himself in a closet during an eclipse. Not for spiritual reasons. Just fear. Pure, unfiltered, imperial-grade fear. He thought the heavens were sending him a breakup message. And he wasn't alone. Let's talk about the royal reaction to eclipses. Because when you've got a crown on your head, every weird celestial event feels personal. In 840 CE, Emperor Louis the Pious, Charlemagne's son, saw a solar eclipse and immediately assumed it was a divine warning. He fasted, prayed, begged forgiveness for sins he might not have even committed yet. A few months later, civil war broke out. Coincidence? Probably. But medieval people loved a good narrative arc. In China, emperors employed full teams of court astronomers whose only job was to spot and interpret eclipses. If they missed one, executed. Yep. Nothing says job pressure like predict the heavens or die. Talk about a hostile work environment. One particularly famous case. In 213 BCE, 2 royal astronomers failed to predict an eclipse. The emperor ordered them beheaded. Brutal, yes, but it did encourage punctuality. Back in Europe, kings turned to astrologers. These weren't wizards with long beards and glitter. These were the respectable kind, the ones who could write in Latin and smelled like dried ink and goat leather. They'd pore over star charts, squint at planetary alignments, and declare that the eclipse meant an impending change in political fortune, which is the medieval way of saying, I have no idea, but you should be worried. You remember when Duke Aldrich of the Northlands, a name you still can't say without rolling your eyes, summoned his entire court during an eclipse to perform a cleansing ritual. It involved wine, feathers, and a naked servant painted gold. You didn't attend. You had better things to do. Not that. But the point stands, even the most powerful people on Earth lost their collective minds when the sun blinked. Because deep down, no one wants to admit how small they really are. You sit on a bench. It's damp. It's always damp. Everything is damp. You watch the eclipse unfold like a slow curtain over the world. The air cools. Shadows lengthen. Your breath fogs slightly. The birds stop singing. Even the flies get confused. It's beautiful. And creepy. Like watching a lion sleep, majestic, but you're still pretty sure it could eat you. You're joined by Brother Willem, the monk who smells like beeswax and regret. He offers you a figure. You take it, despite not liking figs. You chew it thoughtfully, pretending it's better than it is. He tells you the eclipse reminds him of a biblical plague. You nod. It reminds you of your last bath, also rare and full of dramatic lighting. You sit in silence for a while, which, in medieval terms, is pretty sacred. So before you doze off entirely, just a quick nudge. If you're still with us, take a second to like the video and subscribe, if you haven't already. Unless you're asleep, in which case, carry on. And let me know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from. The more obscure your village name, the more likely someone will think you made it up. That's the fun part. Back to the sky. You squint upward. You don't know the science, but you do know it'll pass. You've seen too many of these by now to be afraid. Which is not the same thing as being brave, by the way. You're still terrified of cheese with holes in it. But eclipses? Nah, those are just cosmic curtain calls. Still, not everyone agrees. You hear rumors, distant lands, strange stories. In one region, people bang drums during eclipses to scare away the demon that ate the sun. In another, they fast until the light returns. Some lock their doors. Others run naked into the river. It's chaos, but very organized chaos. The kind with rituals, steps, and annual updates. You remember once reading, or being told, because reading is not your strong suit, about how the ancient Hindus believed Rahu, a celestial demon, was responsible for swallowing the sun during eclipses. They had entire mythologies dedicated to explaining the phenomenon, which is honestly more interesting than orb goes behind other orb. You wonder if the stories are the point. Maybe the fear is just a prelude. The stories, the rituals, the chants, maybe they're humanity's way of coping, of laughing into the darkness, of shaking their fists at the sky and saying, we don't understand this, but we're not going to take it lying down. Except, after Vespers. Because it's late. Eventually, the light returns, as it always does, and the world starts moving again. People come out of hiding. The merchant tries to sell his eclipse bread at a discount. Someone offers you soup that tastes mostly like turnips and old leather. You take it. You're not proud. The eclipse passes, but the memory remains. And it joins the long, strange catalog of other events you witnessed. The comet that made everyone cry. The meteor shower that burned down half the monastery. The rainbow that caused 3 marriages and a chicken rebellion. History is weird. And you were there for it. As the sun climbs back into its rightful spot, you walk home. Slowly. Carefully. Your knees are mutinous. You stop to pet a dog. It sneezes on you. You accept this as affection. You get home. Light the fire. Boil some water. Stare into the flames like a philosopher who smells faintly of goat. You think about how many times people have panicked over the same few minutes of darkness. How kings, peasants, and goats alike have all looked up in fear and awe. How something so predictable still manages to feel mystical. You sip your tea. It tastes like bark. But that's okay. Because you're still here. Still breathing. Still watching the sky. And while the world may not make any more sense now than it did before, you've learned the one truth that really matters. Everything ends. Even the dark. Even the noise. Even the story. But not yet. You wake up in a chapel. You're not entirely sure how you got here. Maybe you wandered in last night looking for warmth. Maybe someone dragged you in after the eclipse, assuming your face meant possessed. Or maybe it's just Wednesday, and this is how Wednesdays start now. Either way, The air smells like old wood, melted beeswax, and a hint of mildew, the holy trinity of medieval architecture. A monk coughs in the corner. Not the delicate kind of cough. This is the kind of cough that echoes, like it's trying to escape his ribcage and start a new life somewhere quieter. You sit up slowly, bones complaining the whole way. The bench you slept on is shaped less like furniture and more like a punishment. In front of you, there's a wooden crucifix, a cracked stained glass window, and a relic that may or may not be a saint's finger in a jar. Ah, medieval Christianity. Equal parts hope and horror. You rub your eyes and remember why you're here. The eclipse. Again. Because, of course, in this timeline of history, this exhausting, repetitive, onion-scented timeline, another solar eclipse has occurred, and once again, humanity is collectively panicking like God sneezed. You look around the chapel and see that you're not alone. There are villagers kneeling, eyes wide, whispering half-remembered prayers. Some are weeping. Some are muttering psalms they only know half the words to. One guy's holding a chicken like it's a rosary. You decide not to question that. So, why here? Why the church? Because when you're terrified, confused, and poor, and the sky turns off like someone blew out the sun, you go to church. That's the rule. In the medieval mind, eclipses aren't astronomy. They're messages. From God. Or the devil. Or both, depending on the season. The church, for its part, has very mixed feelings about eclipses. On one hand, they're natural. They happen. They're in the book of nature, which God presumably authored between creating ducks and inventing sarcasm. But on the other hand, they're just so dramatic. And the church doesn't love being upstaged by the moon. So when a solar eclipse happens, the clergy does what the clergy does best. They interpret it. Wildly. Confidently. With incense. You vaguely remember the last sermon during an eclipse. The priest compared it to divine judgment. Or maybe divine indigestion. Hard to tell. He had a very metaphor-heavy delivery style, and shouted a lot about the mouth of heaven closing upon our sins. You tried to take him seriously, but his robe was on inside out and his sandals squeaked. Still, the church does have a long tradition of reacting very loudly to eclipses. For example, in 1239, an eclipse swept across Europe. Panic followed. Some churches rang their bells to ward off evil. Others held impromptu processions, villagers carrying crosses through the street, chanting, sweating, accidentally hitting each other with relics. It was beautiful. And deeply confusing. Clergy began organizing mass confession events. After all, what better time to get right with God than when you think He might be turning the lights off permanently? You remember standing in line for confession behind a guy who couldn't remember his sins. He just listed all the foods he'd eaten that week and asked if gluttony counted if the bread was stale. The priest nodded solemnly, gave him 3 Hail Marys and a dried fig. You got 2 Our Fathers and a lecture about envy. You were mostly just envious of people who own boots. But the theology gets deeper. Because it wasn't just that eclipses were scary. They were meaningful. Eclipses, in church thinking, often symbolize divine disapproval. Cosmic side-eye. A holy TSK. Augustine, one of the big theological brains of early Christianity, didn't write much about eclipses specifically, but his general vibe was that the cosmos reflected divine order. So when the order got disrupted, even briefly, bad news. Other theologians leaned in harder. They combed the Bible for clues. And boy, did they find them. Darkness in the middle of the day? Oh, absolutely biblical. In fact, many believed that the eclipse was explicitly tied to the crucifixion. According to the Gospels, when Jesus died, darkness fell over the land. Boom. Eclipse. Proof. Never mind that the timing didn't line up astronomically. Medieval theology didn't let little things like physics get in the way of a good narrative. So every eclipse became, in some minds, a little reenactment of divine sorrow. A solar sigh. A reminder of humanity's sin. And of course, every time one happened, someone inevitably cried, "It's the end times." Which was their favorite hobby, second only to dying of typhus. You remember one local priest who was very into the apocalypse. Brother Godwin. He had a chart. A hand-drawn, ink-stained timeline of when the world would end, based entirely on lunar cycles and what he claimed were goose omens. You asked him once why geese were involved. He said, because they honk at truth. You never asked again. The funny thing is, though, for all their dramatics, the church also tried to own the eclipse narrative. They'd preach sermons about how the sun disappearing was proof that you needed more faith, not less. That when the light left, you were supposed to cling harder to God, not panic and set your neighbor's hut on fire. Which, by the way, still happened, but only on weekends. Some monasteries would respond to eclipses by launching full days of fasting and prayer. Others would break out the relics, the shinbone of Saint Someone, the teeth of an unnamed martyr. One abbey claimed to have a splinter of the cross that could reignite the sun. You assumed that was metaphorical. Hopefully. You also remember how, after a particularly long eclipse, the monks held a special vigil where they chanted the Psalms backwards. This was not official doctrine. They just panicked. The abbot later admitted it was probably heresy, but very poetic. Meanwhile, the peasants, your peers, watched all this unfold with a mix of awe and boredom. Because while theology is fascinating, it doesn't put soup in your bowl or lice out of your bed. So most people just sort of nodded along with the sermons, then went home and hung garlic from a ceiling. You know, just in case. And it wasn't just Christianity, by the way. Eclipses were religious events in nearly every culture. In Islam, for example, eclipses weren't feared, but seen as powerful reminders of God's majesty. Special prayers were said, Solar Eclipses, and the event was treated as a moment of reflection, not terror. No screaming. No processions. Just quiet awe. You remember hearing about this from a merchant once. He traveled through Muslim lands and described the whole thing as calm, respectful, and slightly unsettling in its lack of panic. You were impressed. You were also drunk. In Judaism, eclipses were traditionally seen as omens, not of God's wrath, exactly, but as signs. Messages. Warnings. Talmudic writings mention eclipses as events that should make one introspect, especially if paired with other bad behavior, like ignoring widows or overcooking lentils. You realize, sitting here in the chapel, how many cultures have looked at the same sun, the same moon, the same weird overlapping moment, and seen entirely different things. You feel small, but kind of okay about it. Because if nothing else, you're part of a long line of confused, poetic, sweaty humans who've all reacted to eclipses with the same three-stage process. Panic. Ritual. Soup. The priest finally stands. He begins a prayer. Something about divine mercy and solar alignment. You tune it out. Your mind drifts to the smell of baked onions and the sound of goats fighting outside. You hear a snore. You think it might be yours. So if you're still here, somehow, and your eyes haven't drifted shut yet, maybe now's a good time to tap the like button and subscribe, if you haven't already. Unless you're already asleep, in which case, congratulations. You've escaped. But for those still conscious, let me know in the comments what time it is where you are and whether you're curled up in bed, hiding from the sun, or just listening while you do chores. Or confess sins. I don't judge. Eventually, the prayer ends. The villagers shuffle out. You stay seated. You're not quite ready to move. You stare at the stained glass. The colors shift as the sunlight returns, painting the stone walls with reds, blues, and purples. It's almost pretty. In a deeply uncomfortable, itchy sock kind of way. You close your eyes. You breathe in incense, dust, and the faint scent of something burning, probably Brother Anselm's turnip stew. And you think, maybe the eclipse isn't a punishment. Maybe it's a pause, a cosmic blink, a reminder that even the sun needs a break. And maybe, just maybe, so do you. You wake up itchy. Which isn't surprising, considering you spent the night on a straw mattress stuffed with exactly 0 feathers and possibly 2 mice. Your blanket smells like someone else's sin, and there's a definite draft coming through the cracks in your one-wall, all-purpose shack. You scratch your arm, pick a flea out of your sleeve, and sigh. Outside, the world is buzzing with eclipse rumors again. Because the sky went dark yesterday, for all of 7 minutes, and now everyone has an opinion. You, personally, thought it was a bit underwhelming. But to your neighbors, it was either the end of the world, the start of a golden age, or a sign that the baker's wife has been sleeping with the reeve. Again. This is what happens when people have no access to Netflix and too much barley ale. You shuffle out into the village and find it vibrating with activity. And by activity, we mean chaos. To your left, Someone is building a protective eclipse shrine, which appears to be a pile of chicken bones under a wheelbarrow. To your right, a man in a brown tunic is offering sky cleansing services for a small fee and a tunic. You know him. That's Wulfric. Last week he was selling magical leech bags. Wulfric is always ahead of the trend. Let's take a moment to examine how your fellow medieval citizens are reacting to this celestial inconvenience, depending on where they fall in the grand, incredibly rigid, totally unfair social hierarchy of the 12th to 15th century. Because, believe it or not, your reaction to an eclipse in the medieval world has a lot to do with how many teeth you still have and whether your roof is made of thatch or actual stone. Let's start with your people, the peasants. Yes. The overworked, underfed, emotionally exhausted backbone of medieval society, otherwise known as you. As a peasant, your life is already a non-stop parade of minor tragedies. Your daily routine includes things like harvesting with a bent scythe, eating porridge that smells like old socks, and hoping you don't die of something called the sweating sickness. So when the sun suddenly disappears in the middle of the day, you don't go to a telescope. You don't consult a calendar. You scream. Or, more accurately, you blink, you pause, you mutter, "Oh no," and then you either kneel or run in circles while your neighbor tries to baptize a goose. Again. Because for the average peasant, a solar eclipse is proof that the sky is angry, the world is broken, and you probably deserve it. You'd love to have a rational explanation. But that's difficult, because nobody's invented rational explanation yet. Also, most of the books are in Latin, and you can't read anyway. Instead, you rely on the community's most trusted source of knowledge, the oldest person in the village, who once saw a pig sneeze and claimed it predicted a storm. So someone's grandfather, half-blind and completely barefoot, stands on a barrel and declares that this eclipse is a sign from God. Or possibly a punishment for not attending Vespers. Or maybe the sheep uprising has finally begun. No one really knows. But everyone's afraid. Now, on to the clergy. We covered their theological take in an earlier chapter. But on a personal level, reactions vary wildly. Some monks see the eclipse and immediately begin copying out doomsday prophecies in painfully slow calligraphy. Others grab the incense and chant for hours in the chapel until they pass out from dehydration and mild heresy. One friar, you recall, responded by flagellating himself with such intensity that he tore his own robe and had to borrow pants from a cook. But then you have the slightly smug clergymen, the educated ones. The ones who've read Pliny the Elder and think they understand celestial mechanics. They stroke their beards and say things like, yes, a syzygy, and you want to throw a bead at their head. Because while technically they might be right, they still think tomatoes are poisonous and believe demons live in the belly. So their credibility is flexible. Then there are the nobles. Let's talk about them. Because if you think peasants overreacted to eclipses, just wait until you meet a baron who thinks his hunting trip got cursed by the moon. You remember it vividly. There was a feast. The torches were lit, the roast pig was sweating on the table, and Lord Humbert was halfway through a long, drunken rant about how his armor was too shiny for war. Just as he raised a goblet to toast his own bravery, the eclipse began. The light dimmed. The nobles froze. A lady fainted into her soup. Someone shouted, "The king is dead," even though he wasn't anywhere nearby. And Lord Humbert? He dropped to his knees and offered his lands to whatever god currently controls the sky. His steward gently reminded him that he was Catholic. Humbert told him to shut up and kissed a tapestry. Nobles, despite all their money and shiny boots, are still terrified of being irrelevant. So an eclipse feels like the universe is trying to cancel them. They respond with either immediate charity, handing out stale bread like it's a redemption coupon, or wild superstition. One countess, you remember, demanded that all her servants wear veils for 3 days so that the darkness would not attach itself to their faces. Another noble family covered all their windows with black cloth and locked themselves in the cellar with pickled fish and 40 barrels of wine. They stayed there for a week and emerged very pale and extremely gassy. Merchants, meanwhile, had a different take. For them, eclipses were less about sin and more about sales. You remember passing a stall in the town square where a clever trader sold eclipse candles, supposedly blessed by a monk who may or may not have been asleep at the time. Another hawk bottled holy water, rainwater, really, with hand-painted labels featuring the Virgin Mary and a confused-looking sun. There were also protective amulets made from bone, bread, and occasionally someone's molar. Demand was high. Supply was unsanitary. But the most successful merchant? He charged people a penny to look at the eclipse through a piece of smoke glass. He claimed it filtered out the demon rays. In reality, it just made everyone squint and then bump into things for the rest of the day. Still, profits were excellent. Even the local healer got in on the trend, claiming the eclipse could cure rashes, gout, and excessive melancholy, which was code for being annoying. The scholars, the very few who existed, reacted with calm, cautious fascination. You remember one university man in particular, Master Elric of Bath. He set up a series of complex instruments to track the eclipse's motion. Quadrants, astrolabes, a series of very impressive scrolls, and what looked suspiciously like a soup spoon glued to a stick. He spent the entire eclipse measuring angles and scribbling equations, while the crowd around him screamed and threw cabbage at a nearby cow. Afterward, he declared, "We have witnessed a perfectly natural conjunction," and then was chased down the road by a nun who accused him of sorcery. Because the line between scientist and heretic was extremely thin. And then, of course, there are the children. They respond to eclipses with the kind of honesty only children can provide. Some are terrified, clinging to their mothers and crying because the sun has gone away and now the pigs look weird. Others are delighted, running through the darkened fields, yelling that they're invisible now and poking each other with sticks. One boy, you recall, tried to train a chicken to fly at the sun and fix it. The chicken was deeply uninterested. Finally, the storytellers. The bards, minstrels, and wandering lunatics who show up whenever something dramatic happens. They immediately begin composing songs about the eclipse, featuring lines like "The moon did bite the burning flame," and "All the world wept in shame." You tried to sing along once. You were booed. Apparently your voice offends the divine. Still, the song lingers in your head. Because eclipses, as much as they terrify and confuse and inconvenience, are also beautiful. Strange. Rare. They're a pause in the day. A break from routine. A moment where time hiccups and everything feels important. Even you. Even with the fleas. Even with the blisters and the hay in your hair. You lie back in the grass now, staring at the sky. The sun is back, warm and smug. The world didn't end. Again. But for a few minutes, it might have. And you were there. Not a lord. Not a scholar. Not a priest. Just a human. Looking up. You close your eyes. You exhale. Maybe the darkness wasn't a punishment. Maybe it was just a reminder that the world doesn't need to make sense to be worth living in. And that sometimes, when everything goes dark, it's okay to stop, breathe, and let someone else light the torch. You're in a field now. Not a poetic, flower-dappled field like the ones you see in oil paintings or on depressing medieval tapestries, where everyone looks mildly constipated. No, this is a working field. A lumpy, mud-choked expanse of half-frozen soil and shattered peasant dreams. It smells like sweat, livestock, and whatever the wind dragged in from the nearby bog. Your job today is digging. What are you digging for? You're not entirely sure. Your lord said pharaohs, and then gestured vaguely while riding past you on a very expensive horse. So you just start digging. It's the medieval solution to most things. You're bent over, knees aching, back already reminding you that you're 32 and basically elderly in this era, when the sky darkens. Not in a dramatic, apocalyptic, we're all going to die kind of way. More like a dimmer switch was slowly turned down by an indecisive god. You pause. The shovel, really just a flat piece of metal attached to a questionable stick, slips from your grasp. Your breath fogs the air. Because here it comes again. Another eclipse. And the rumors have already started to leak like bad wine from a cracked barrel. This time, people are saying it's not just a sign from God. It's a test. A cosmic test. According to someone who spoke to someone who once met a man who might have been a friar, this eclipse will reveal who in the village is pure and who is secretly possessed by forest demons. No pressure. You dust your hands off on your tunic, which doesn't help at all. You're now just muddy and slightly offended, and glance toward the village center. A crowd is forming. It's like eclipse theater. There's a man with a cowbell announcing that no one should look directly at the sun, or they'll go blind and fall in love with a wolf. Someone else is handing out garlic necklaces. A child is screaming because their shadow disappeared, and now they think they're dying. Classic. You slowly make your way toward the main square, where things have escalated beyond reason. A makeshift platform has been built out of barrels and soggy firewood. Upon it stands a prophet, who you know for a fact is just the butcher's cousin, Garwin, who once got kicked in the head by a mule and decided it made him enlightened. Garwin is wearing a robe made of stitched-together rags, a belt made of vines, and a crown of dried mushrooms. His voice is hoarse, his eyes are wide, and he's declaring that the moon is jealous of the sun's glory and has come to eat it alive. People are nodding solemnly. You wonder briefly if you're the only sane person left. Then you remember you once tried to teach a chicken Latin, so maybe you should just enjoy the show. A few paces away, a group of monks is chanting, "Whoa!" throaty syllables that sound vaguely threatening. They formed a protective circle around a large candle, which they claim is infused with relic dust and the sanctified breath of a bishop. You're pretty sure it's just pig fat. Elsewhere, a woman in a blue hood is trying to sell eclipse ointment. It smells like mold and has the consistency of regret. But here's the wild part, none of this is weird. Not in your world. Because medieval life isn't grounded in logic or repeatable evidence. It's held together by faith, tradition, superstition, and an aggressive resistance to asking too many questions. In your time, cause and effect are more like casual acquaintances. If your cow dies and there's a lunar eclipse that night, those two things are obviously related. The cow was probably sinful, or cursed, or maybe it looked at the moon wrong. Either way, it's gone now. Time to bury it and move on. So when the sun vanishes again, swallowed by a moon that everyone thinks is plotting something, the entire village begins the ancient art of panicking politely. There's the kneelers, people who drop to the ground, arms raised, eyes shut, praying to be spared or at least promoted to slightly less miserable lives. There are the screamers, usually kids, drunks, or that one guy who thinks bees live in his ears. And then there are the climbers. These are the true performers. They climb onto rooftops, stumps, barrels, and occasionally livestock to declare they've received divine visions. You know it's probably heat stroke. Or the beer. But they get applause anyway. Because nothing brings people together quite like shared confusion. Your friend Emmett is next to you now. He's carrying a sack of onions and a vague sense of dread. He leans over and whispers, "If this is the end of the world, do you think I still have to pay rent?" You tell him that if the world ends, you're going to punch your landlord and steal his horse. He nods. That feels right. But then the darkness deepens. The birds go silent. The air cools, just enough to raise goosebumps on your arms. Everyone stops. No chanting. No weeping. Just a frozen, breath-held moment where the village seems to pause in its collective madness. You tilt your head and stare. There it is. A black circle. Perfectly round, perfectly wrong, hanging where the sun should be. A glowing rim surrounds it, like fire through fog. It's beautiful, and terrifying, and unfair. Because you didn't ask for this. You didn't cause it. You're just trying to dig furrows and make it through the week without catching plague, being accused of sorcery, or accidentally insulting the Reeves mustache. But now you have to deal with the sky doing whatever this is. And in that stillness, your thoughts get weird. You start to wonder, what if this really is a test? What if the gods, or God, or the ghost of Emperor Charlemagne, is watching to see how you behave in the dark? You clasp your hands. You try to look humble. Then you sneeze. Loudly. Right in the middle of the silence. Everyone turns to look. Garwin the mushroom prophet points at you and screams, "He is the moon's chosen." You slowly back away. 10 minutes later, the light returns. Just like that. Birds resume chirping. The prophet falls off his barrel. The monks stop chanting and start arguing over who gets the rest of the pig fat. Emmett offers you an onion. The world didn't end. Again. But things feel slightly different. Not because the sky changed, but because, once again, you were reminded just how fragile everything is. How easy it is for people to break under the weight of not knowing. How quickly fear can become ritual. How quickly ritual becomes prophet. How quickly prophet becomes prophecy. You walk home slowly, still carrying your shovel. At your door, you look up one last time. The sun is back. Strong. Blinding. Almost smug. You squint at it, whisper, "Nice try," and go inside. And as you settle onto your mattress, lumpy, straw-filled, and possibly haunted by a damp spirit named Bertha, you realize something. Even if eclipses are just cosmic coincidences, they still manage to reset the day. They make everyone pause, look up, wonder. And for a world filled with mud, plague, injustice, and uncomfortable shoes, that's not nothing. You close your eyes. You sleep with dirt under your nails, ash on your cheek, and a strange sort of peace in your chest. Because even the most chaotic darkness eventually passes. And sometimes, what follows is light. Even if it's filtered through the smell of turnips. It's market day, which means people from every surrounding hamlet, hovel, and miserable muddy outpost are converging in one loud, chaotic, suspiciously damp square to trade goods, spread rumors, and accidentally sneeze on each other. You're here because your mother sent you to buy turnips and possibly find a spouse. She wasn't specific about which was more important. You push through the crowd, a tangled mess of elbows, hay carts, chicken feathers, and the occasional goat wearing a flower crown, and finally arrive at a stall that proudly advertises herbs, hopes, and other useful eyes. Behind it stands a woman named Orla, who everyone swears is a healer, even though her main treatment involves yelling at your ailments and waving a wet rag around. She eyes you with the expression of someone who has absolutely no time for your nonsense. Looking for something specific, she croaks, already reaching for a jar labeled sun sickness remedy. Because, of course, there's talk again. People are saying the eclipse last week did something to the light. That it changed the very nature of the sun. That it left a residue, invisible but dangerous. Like guilt. Or feudal taxes. Some people are reporting skin boils. Others say their animals are acting different, which usually just means cows are slightly more dramatic than usual. One man claims he hasn't been able to look directly at his wife since the eclipse. You suspect that has less to do with astronomy and more to do with unresolved marital tension. Either way, Orla's business is booming. She sells you a vial of something greenish, thick, and mildly fizzing. She tells you to rub it on your temples every time you sense celestial interference. You nod solemnly. Then you hand her your last coin and silently curse the moon. You continue through the market, which smells like roasted fish, wet straw, old shoes, and existential dread. People are gossiping loudly. There's a new theory now, that eclipses are caused by giant dragons fighting in the sky. It's somehow less ridiculous than what the town priest has been saying, which is that the eclipse was a holy warning, and the next one will signal a purge of sin. Nobody has defined what sin means in this case, but the general consensus is that it includes dancing, smiling, and having suspiciously nice hair. You reach a group of students from the nearby monastery, gathered in a circle, debating whether eclipses are the result of divine punishment or simply a result of planetary alignment. You listen for a moment. One of them is quoting Ptolemy. Another one is eating an entire onion, like an apple. The third is drawing circles in the dirt while muttering, "It's all angles, you fools." You quietly back away, because you've seen how this ends. Academic debates, in your time, don't often lead to consensus. They usually end with someone being hit with a book or forced to copy scripture as punishment. In Latin. And honestly, you have better things to do. Like figuring out whether you still need to plant your barley now that the moon has apparently declared war on sunlight. Back home, your neighbor, a man who once claimed to be descended from a noble line of sky watchers, but who actually just has very poor vision, is preparing for the next eclipse. He's built what he calls a viewing platform, which is really just a ladder tied to a tree. He climbs it every day, holding a broken piece of glass in front of his face, muttering things like, "She's coming back, I can feel it." You bring him soup. He thanks you by blessing your ankles. You're not entirely sure why. Later that evening, at the communal fire, people are telling stories again. Not bedtime stories. Not legends. But eclipse stories. And not one of the matches. There's the farmer who swears he saw his shadow run away during the eclipse. The baker who claims her bread rose 3 times faster than normal, meaning the eclipse is secretly a fertility sign. The shepherd who now refuses to sleep unless his sheep are arranged in a circle to confuse the heavens. You sip watery ale and try to disappear into the smoke. Because once again, you're reminded that your world doesn't understand phenomena. It survives them. Science, in your time, is not a tool of reassurance. It's a whispered possibility, buried under centuries of theology, guesswork, and the occasional hallucinogenic mushroom. Your ancestors built pyramids. Your descendants will build telescopes. But you build explanations. Out of old scrolls, fever dreams, and whatever the monk down the road decided to scream at the sky last Thursday. And so, every eclipse becomes a choose-your-own apocalypse. For some, it's a chance to repent. For others, a chance to profit. And for a rare few, like you, it's just a very annoying day where you have to explain, again, that the sky getting dark doesn't mean your chickens are possessed. Although, to be fair, one of them is suspicious. You head to bed that night with a familiar feeling in your stomach. It's not dread. Not exactly. More like a soft hum of awareness. The same feeling you get when winter starts to whisper at the edge of autumn. When the plague returns early. When someone you trust starts carrying around bones for protection. It's the feeling of living in a world where the unknown doesn't knock. It kicks down the door, demands your bread, and leaves without paying. And so, you do what everyone does. You bury your fears under hay and ritual. You pray, just in case. You hang a charm above your door, even though you know it's just a twig tied with string. You dream of light returning. You don't understand the cosmos, but you do understand fear. And in your time, that's enough to build a whole religion. Or 3. As you drift off to sleep, you hear the wind pick up. The trees creak. An owl hoots in the distance. You think about dragons in the sky. You think about monks copying diagrams of planets they've never seen. You think about eclipses that happened before your time, how they were feared, misinterpreted, worshipped. And you wonder what future people will think of you, of your beliefs, of your superstition, of your onion-based healthcare. You smile in the dark, because they'll never understand. Not really. Not until the sky goes black for them. And their world, their safe, electric, convenient world, is forced to remember what it's like to look up at the heavens and not know what's coming. You roll over. Your mattress creaks. You dream of orbits and torches and old women whispering to the moon. The eclipse is over. But the stories? They've just begun. You wake up to a smell. Not a good smell. Medieval mornings rarely offer those. This one is something between burnt oatmeal, wet wool, and faint moral failure. You recognize it immediately. It's festival season, which means people are trying too hard to be happy. You shuffle to the window, a loose shutter held together by splinters, hope, and exactly one nail, and you peer out. The village square has been transformed. There are garlands made of what looks like dried cabbage. Someone's draped a faded tapestry across the bakery, and a few enterprising children are selling moon buns, stale bread shaped vaguely like celestial objects and dusted with sugar stolen from the monastery. You rub your eyes. Because today is Eclipse Day, an unofficial, entirely invented holiday designed by the town elders to reclaim the fear of last month's terrifying celestial event. You know the real reason: the tavern's trying to boost meat sales. You head out anyway. You're not going to see what happens when an entire population with chronic vitamin deficiencies tries to throw a party. At the center of the square, a platform has been built. It's more elaborate than the last one, actual with this time, not just barrels and wishful thinking. There's a chair at the top, painted gold and red, with someone sitting in it who is absolutely not qualified for any kind of authority. It's Alfric, the village candle inspector. He's wearing a robe made of curtains and a crown made of baked bread. He stands up and raises his arms. On this sacred day, he bellows, we commemorate the moon's conquest of the sun. People cheer. Some politely. Some because they think they're supposed to. One man yells down with light, but trips over a pig and is promptly ignored. You spot your friend Emmett by the cabbage pie stand. He's wearing a tunic embroidered with tiny moons and chewing something suspiciously crunchy. Festive turnips, he mumbles, offering you one. You decline. You've made that mistake before. A group of robed villagers begins a slow, choreographed dance meant to represent the celestial struggle. It mostly involves spinning in circles and occasionally bumping into each other. One of them throws up. Symbolic, probably. Then, the games begin. There's Pin the Sin on the eclipse, where people take turns guessing which of their personal failings caused the sky to darken. There's a dunking booth for suspected heretics, although it's just a barrel full of pond water and nobody's quite sure what counts as heresy this week. At one corner of the square, a local blacksmith is selling eclipse repellent, which is just vinegar in tiny bottles. Keeps the shadows out of your soul, he claims. You buy one, just in case. Because here's the thing. You know the eclipse isn't personal. You've heard the monks explain planetary motion. You've seen diagrams, crude as they are, drawn in the dirt with a stick and enough confidence to count as education. But knowing doesn't undo the feeling. The feeling you had when the light vanished. The cold that crept in. The birds that stopped singing. The way every single person you knew stood still, not because they wanted to, but because something ancient told them to. And now you're all pretending it was fun. Like the sky didn't nearly swallow you. Like you didn't have an existential crisis in the cabbage field. You smile anyway. Because that's what Eclipse Day is for, pretending it's okay. You sit on a bale of hay and watch the next performance, a dramatic reenactment of the Great Shadowing, performed by the town's most enthusiastic amateur actors. The sun is portrayed by a blonde boy in gold robes. The moon by a short girl holding a painted cheese wheel. There's a third actor playing confused humanity, who mostly runs in circles yelling, "What have we done?" It's surprisingly accurate. At intermission, someone hands out sun cakes, flat, burnt discs of flour that vaguely resemble despair. You eat one. It's terrible. You eat another. Then, as if summoned by dramatic timing, the clouds begin to gather. Not many. Just a few. But enough to cast a gray pall over the square. People look up. Laughter dies down a little. No one says anything, but you all remember. Last time, the sky changed. And you all changed with it. Even now, weeks later, there's a weight that hangs in the corners of the village. A hush between conversations. A shared, silent knowledge that you all witnessed something vast, unknowable, and completely out of your control. The eclipse might be gone, but it left a mark. Some people became more devout. Others started drinking more. One man has started collecting owls. No one's sure why. And now, here you are, dressed in festival rags, pretending it all makes sense. The clouds pass. The sun returns. People cheer again, louder this time, like they've banished a ghost. Like they won a war. Like they matter. You join them. Because why not? You clap. You smile. You accept your free sun coin, which is really just a wooden button painted yellow, with a suspicious bite mark on it. Later, as the crowd thins and the garlands start to wilt, you find yourself alone at the edge of the village. You look up at the sky. Blue again. Normal. Boring. But it doesn't feel quite the same. Because now you know the light can vanish. That nothing is certain. That the moon doesn't care what day it is, or whether you've finished harvesting, or whether the baker's goat gave birth to twins. It just moves. Quietly. In circles. And sometimes it blocks out the only thing keeping you warm. You lie in the grass, arms behind your head, listening to the last echoes of laughter drift on the wind. You think of future eclipses. Future stories. Of people 100 years from now, still confused, still awed, still writing songs about things they don't understand. You close your eyes. You sleep beneath a sky that has scared you, thrilled you, and forgotten you. And you dream of shadows that fall too slowly, and linger just a little too long. You wake up with a fever. Or at least, something close to it. You're sweating, but freezing. You're coughing, but no one wants to acknowledge it. The town physician, who last week confused a goat for a child, has recommended leeches and aggressive prayer. Which means it's official, the plague has returned. There's no announcement. No new scroll nailed to a post. Just that creeping, familiar feeling that people are dying faster than usual and no one's quite sure what to do about it. Well, that's not true. They are sure. They're just wrong. And you, lucky you, are stuck in the middle of it. The village is quiet. Too quiet. Normally, there's the sound of arguing about cheese prices or someone playing a badly tuned lute. But today, all you hear are murmurs. Whispers behind doors. Scraping sounds as people bolt shutters. Hushed prayers to saints with names that sound made up. You wander outside, wrapped in 3 layers of wool and denial. There's something in the air. Not just sickness. Not just fear. But that strange, familiar unease, the kind that only shows up when something's coming that no one can explain. And then you hear it. The word, eclipse. Someone says it like it's a curse. Another spits on the ground when they hear it. A third insists the plague didn't arrive until after the last one. Which means, of course, the moon is to blame. Not hygiene. Not rats. Not the general lack of medical understanding. No, it's obviously the shadow from space. You sigh. But deep down, you get it. Because ever since the sky went dark last time, people have been different. Some more devout. Others more paranoid. A few dangerously creative. Which brings us to Brother Leontius. A monk. A scribe. A mon, with too much ink and not enough supervision. He lives at the monastery on the hill. The one with the caved-in roof and the mysterious chanting that starts every Tuesday at sunset and never gets explained. Leontius is convinced he can predict eclipses. And not just when they'll happen, but what they'll mean. He spent the last 4 years charting the moon, drawing circles, measuring shadows with spoons, and testing theories on unfortunate chickens. Last month, he declared that another eclipse is coming. Not because of planetary motion, but because of sin buildup. His math is questionable. But that hasn't stopped half the village from believing him. You decide to visit. The monastery is quiet, aside from the constant hum of bees and whatever's rotting in the cellar. You knock on the heavy wooden door, which opens slowly, as if annoyed. Leontius is there, barefoot, bearded, eyes red from too much reading and possibly weeping. He invites you in, offers you holy broth, which is just rainwater and thyme. You sip it anyway, because social pressure is stronger than your immune system. He shows you his calculations. There are scrolls, diagrams, a parchment covered entirely in small circles and the word moon repeated 70 times. Next eclipse, he says, tapping one particular smudge, will bring reckoning. You raise an eyebrow. He interprets this as encouragement. He explains that if the shadow falls on a Thursday, it means pestilence will double. If it falls on a feast day, livestock will go mad. If it happens during a leap year, the river will boil. You point out that rivers don't usually respect calendars. He ignores you. You leave with a copy of his prophetic moon index and a mild case of second-hand lunacy. Back in the village, people are preparing. For what? No one knows. But preparation is a comfort. They're hanging charms again, bones, garlic, twisted bits of metal. Someone's painted a sun on the side of their house. Another person has shaved their head to reduce the moon's influence on hair. It's unclear how any of this helps, but it does make everyone feel slightly more in control, which is the real goal. And then, it happens. The sky begins to dim. Not fast. Not all at once. But slow. Creeping. A shadow sliding over the light like a curtain pulled by invisible fingers. This one's partial, not total darkness, but enough to remind everyone what fear tastes like. People freeze. One woman starts screaming about frogs. A man drops to his knees and offers his shoes to the heavens. A child begins reciting the alphabet backward, which no one knew they could do. You just stand there, because you've seen it before. You know what it is. You know the science. And still it feels like something has gone wrong. That you've been left behind. That the light might not come back this time. The eclipse lasts less than an hour. But in your heart, it lasts longer. The fear it leaves behind doesn't vanish with the sun. It lingers, settles in the cracks. People speak in hushed tones for days. Someone tries to burn Leontius' scrolls. Another person claims they saw the devil's hoofprint in the ash. Trade slows. Church attendance rises. Paranoia soars. The plague continues, unaffected. And deep down, everyone starts to believe, just a little, that maybe, just maybe, the moon is watching. Not a rock, not a satellite, but an eye, a presence, a judge. You keep the prophetic index hidden under your mattress. Not because you believe it, but because part of you wonders what if. And isn't that the most human thing of all? Not knowing, but believing anyway. You fall asleep that night to the sound of the wind rattling the shutters. The stars are out. The sky is clear.